Hey, how y'all doing? Give yourselves a round of applause. It is past 5 p.m. You are still sat. Whew. All right, my name is Laura. I have the toughest slot of the day, in my own opinion, and that's because it is late, and I am between you and beer or family or hugs or pot plants or whatever it is you do in your spare time. I'm going to be respectful of that and try and use a little less than my slot. And let's face it, Matt did an amazing, amazing job. So I want to leave you on a slightly different note. Now, I appreciate that today started with Runa, because Runa made me feel okay that I was a bit weird and different. Because I don't hack things, I don't pop shell, I haven't for many, many, many years. I used to say I hack people, and that feels a bit dirty and wrong. I don't do that either. This is my credentials. It got some attention yesterday at PurpleCon. People had feelings and opinions, and that's lovely. I like that. Now, credential slides about showing why you're qualified to give a talk, and by the end of the talk, you'll understand why at least 50% of this slide is actually covered in things that are nothing to do with technology. Because it turns out, this is a story about a lot of mistakes that I made, and a lot of assumptions, and how I learned, in the space of about 6 months, that all of the wonderful things I thought I knew were garbage, and none of them worked. So, let's start at the beginning and what we're going to cover. We're going to talk a little bit about the problem of growing old. I last spoke on this stage, or one very much like it, in 2014. And what you won't have known at the time is before I came on, I was sobbing in the wings. I was that nervous. And now it's years later, and I have many more grey hairs, and I don't cry as much. I have other strategies, like chocolate. I'm getting older. You're getting older. We're going to talk about why age matters and why it doesn't, and what I learned about helping people that were older than me. And I'm going to give a tool out to the world today. I gave one out yesterday. This is a different one, because it's that kind of week. And we are going to embrace the fact that we're different. We're going to learn how to measure that in a repeatable way, and how to apply that to your world. Now, whether you're offensive or defensive, this kind of thinking will help you customize what you do. Because it turns out security is as varied as people are varied, and that means infinitely so. So how on earth did I get here? Well, about 3 years ago, I turned away from security. I was busy doing other things. This time last year, I was literally having a baby. I had other things going on. And those things took me out of cities. I was out of Auckland a lot more than before. I was at the coast. I was meeting other people. And it was like a glorious, weird adventure. But it wasn't just me, right? It was me and small people, and people who were different genders, and different positions, professions, viewpoints. It was more small people, because they came into the world, and it was older people. And what I realized is my natural instinct to look at everyone around them and go, oh, your security sucks, which is a natural trait in our community, followed me out into the world. Suddenly, I looked at people who were out doing their day-to-day shopping online, who do nothing in the security space, not even tech folk. And, that little judgy part of my brain was like, you could be better. Have you thought about two-factor? And I thought I was being helpful, until I met Rose. Now, I'm not the first security person to have an old person that's inspired them. If you follow Jessie Irwin on Twitter, she has a gang of old ladies, and it's glorious. If you follow her adventures with her gang of old ladies, it's wonderful. But Rose taught me a lot. Her name has been changed for protection purposes, and because she would hurt me. She is tough as nails. Now, Rose likes to do things on the internet. She is 78. She is wickedly smart, but, she's 78. Computers were not just a new thing to her world, but the entire world has changed around her several times. And she's fiercely independent. She's an alpha woman, and I've got to respect her, literally got to. So I got to her life, and we're talking about shopping, and we're talking about what happens when she's rung from somebody asking to, fix her Spark account, or I've spotted a virus on your computer. And we got talking about all of these things. And I started trotting out my standard advice. Have you used a password manager? What, should we do some multi-factor? It'll be fun. What about those privacy settings on Facebook? Have you considered sharing less? And yeah, that went well. Because it turned out her level of independence, her age, her view of the world meant that that advice was either difficult or in some cases physically impossible for her to follow. And it wasn't because she was stupid. It wasn't because she was malicious or careless. It was because she was very different to me. And so I started thinking, how on earth do I protect Rose? Because I was quite invested in her safety at this point. I turned up at her house and she was buying in bulk from Facebook ads. And I was terrified. Not only did I not know what I was going to find every time I turned up, but I knew that there could be better ways. I knew there was risk there, and I didn't know how to protect her. And if any of you have been in a position where you know there's a problem in the world, whether it's with a computer system or with someone's behavior, and you can't fix it, and you get that really sad, uncomfortable feeling of helplessness, that's what I felt. If you don't feel that, that's interesting. Empathy is important. You might want to work on it. Right. So I started thinking, how do I help Rose? And I started thinking about myself. I was like, what makes me different from her? Other than a few years and several, knowledge sparkles, as I like to call them. Well, we're all on a bit of an adventure, right? We're born, we get older, we have some adventures on the way, and eventually we go live on a farm. And we're all at a different part in that journey. And our journeys look different. Some are longer and some are shorter, and some are easier and some are harder, and some of them are varied in ways we can never predict in advance. She is further along. She's had many different adventures to me. Now, if all of the advice that I give is colored by the analogies and the knowledge I have from my existence, then there's sort of an ego there, right? There's an assumption that what I have done in my life matches what she has done in hers, and therefore I'm trying to fit all of my things onto her. Now, if you're in machine learning or any kind of data science, we'd call this overclassification. It doesn't work. My T-shirt isn't going to fit her. And I don't know why I thought it would. But we do. It works in my system, it works on my machine. We do this time and time again. And the funny thing is, I was like, why can't I figure this out? Why can't I understand what I'll want to do when I'm old? So I started looking into brains, because I love brains, like really fascinating things. You should donate your brain if you get to that point in your life. It's valuable. They do good research. And I found that we are almost physically incapable of associating ourselves with our future self. The further into the future we're looking, so 5 years out, 10 years out, the further that time goes, the more like a completely different person we see it. Which is why, when I say to myself, Laura, you should eat less chocolate today because next year you're going to go on a wonderful holiday and you want to be fit and active and healthy, I'll go, well, yeah, but future Laura's got it coming. So I can't sit there and honestly go, well, I know how to protect future Laura, and so I can't protect Rose. I don't know what she's going to be like, and I'm challenged by I can't even think like that. So how do we protect our elders? I started down this rabbit hole. After promising myself I would never do any security research again, I would go out into the world and not do technology, I found myself knee-deep in research that had nothing to do with technology, everything to do with people, and was definitely security. So, like I said, multiple failures. How do we protect them, and how do we challenge the assumptions that we have that are really unhelpful about those groups? Now, the first thing that we need to reflect on is that aging doesn't affect us all in the same way. So Rose is 78, some late 70s. But a number, when you get past a certain point, stops mattering. Raise your hand if your age radar is completely broken. You couldn't confidently say the age of most of this room. It's because we can't judge people on that number anymore. It's only really relevant when you're at the start of your life, and then it's more to do with school systems and, age of consent and that kind of thing. You can have somebody who's in their late 60s and somebody who's in their early 90s, and you wouldn't be able to guess without really digging into it which one was the more independent, able, cognitive, analytical one of the two. It's not something you can just read off a label, and there's certainly no, oh, I'm 90 now and therefore this is my stereotype. This makes security really hard, Because we like going, well, this bucket looks like this, and this bucket looks like that, and I will treat them as such. Whether it's circumstances, genetics, illness, your behaviors, your diet, your culture, whether you interact with others, all of these things change how you age and how your mind ages, not just your body. And so that means your abilities and the tooling and the advice we give, the success rate is variable based on all of these things. Now, if any of you like entropy and big problem spaces, maths nerds time, permutations, we have dozens. This is hell. If you need, I need one approach to fix it all, this is not your space. And in fact, our age and our ability and our confidence, so if we see the upside on my really badly hand-drawn graph as your independence level and time across the bottom, we actually gain confidence and skill for a period, and it goes down over time. It may, in fact, over time cycle, where we have bursts, where we learn new things and we grow, and then we stop again. And then maybe you move jobs or move areas or move roles, and this goes again. And so we're not even saying, I need to protect you at this age because it's static. I need to readjust my protections for you as you change. It's dynamic security controls in an ever-changing environment. Now, given I struggle to, manage a small company's worth of security that's fairly static, how on earth do you cope with an evolving set of problems that are different each and every day? In fact, the older we get, the less useful this age thing became. The more older people I spoke to, the more I started throwing age out entirely. I was like, right, fine. Older people, whatever you want to call it, they are as varied as we are now. So I can't use this anymore, and I got frustrated. And I hate getting frustrated. So, firstly, I asked a really spiteful question. I was like, right, fine, screw it. Should we even allow older people who can't be safe online to be online? Yep, not a fine moment for me. Like I said, mistakes were made. I kind of believe, now I reflect on it, that being digitally active is a human right. It's part of interacting in society. The people we cut off from access to the internet and the key systems that are on it are isolated and disadvantaged in ways we can't really even comprehend unless you've been in that position. And in fact, if you look at the way that device ownership has changed, even in the 2 years in this diagram, so that's 2015, 2016, we see magnificent amounts of increase in the use of smartphones, smart TVs. Digital citizenship, digital engagement is not just part of day-to-day, it is a substantially increasing part of the day-to-day across all demographics. We're not talking just the geek will inherit, we're talking about everyone is in this space and adopting it. So we have to protect everyone there, and that's hard. Now, I started talking to Age Concern. I was like, right, I can't be the only one in this space. And it turns out they have a recipe for life. They say that to have a happy and healthy life, especially in your senior years, you need these things. You need role models and curiosity, generosity, equilibrium, friendship, family, adaptability. Now, I'd love you to look at that list and try and identify which ones of those you currently get from the digital sphere and not just from the physical space. I did the maths myself. It's at least 70% of those I seek out in the digital space before I do it in the real world. Friendship and family, I do a lot face-to-face, but when I'm looking up things and I'm curious, or even when I'm being generous, whether with time or money, I tend to do that digitally now. My culture, because I'm from somewhere, but I live somewhere, I have family in different places, my culture is partially digital now. So if we're going to help people at this stage in their life to meet all of these recipes for success, it has to be in the digital space. So I was like, well, okay, so this can't be the first time we've ever had to figure out how to help people. And it turns out it isn't. We measure people's independence already. If you have ever dealt with or are helping somebody older than yourself with difficult needs, then you may have come across some of these. We call them diagnostic frameworks. Now, there are a real core reason we have these. Firstly, to assess independence. So can we give it a level, a score? To understand support requirements, and then to request to allocate resources. So in the physical space, that's providing things like carers or ramps or whatever physical equipment you need to get life done. And we do this regularly. It's not a one-off event. It's done on an annual basis or on a 2-year basis so that your needs change and the support requirements can change with it. We have the concept that people go from being fully independent, like much of you are now, many of you would count as fully independent in most of your life, through to being less dependent and less independent still, and eventually being reliant on systems or support or carers or tools. And that's important, that progression, because it means we have to progress with our security too. I'll come back to that. When we're looking at daily living, we have 2 frameworks that are commonly used. There's the CATS framework and then the Lawton-Brody. And they measure what they call the core instruments of daily living. So if you look at this is the stuff we take for granted, the ability to dress ourselves, to feed ourselves, to take our medication. I was like, okay, I understand this. So if we can assess these things, and there are diagnostic paper-based frameworks, you can score somebody against these criteria, and you can say, where are you on this scale? What support do you need? Okay, I can get this. So I started going, if this is the activities of daily living, feeding, washing, clothing, medicating, then what are our activities of digital living, and how do we measure that? And I started building an instrumental framework for the activities of digital living. Now, you'll notice I put Bell and crossed it out. That's because I talk to academics, and they say, yeah, you have to put your name at the front, and it makes you feel really awkward. So you can just ignore that bit, but I did it because I was feeling brave that day. I have, after having lots of conversations, doing lots of research with these groups, I've got it down to a set of 8 activities for digital living. Now, I might be wrong. I'm happy. In fact, I welcome the debate after this as to, is there something I've missed? But things like shopping, financial management, finding information, choosing, adopting new technologies, physically using devices, entertainment, all things that we do digitally all the time without even thinking about it. And so I want to measure an individual's independence level with carrying out these daily digital activities. Now, for each one of these activities, I want to talk about, with an individual, how frequently they do it. So do they do it every day, multiple times a day, or just every now and again, or never? And when they do it all on their own? Do they require assistance? Or do they need someone to do it physically for them? They don't do it at all, but somebody does it on their behalf. I also started looking at some additional things, confidence levels, safety, behaviors in the event of the unexpected. So what do we do when bad things happen? And I've pulled all of this together into a framework where we could score an individual. Now, you can go download this framework. There's a link coming up. And you can even go and do the assessment yourself. There is a little online quiz that you can go and take. But I'll come back to that and why I love you dearly, but I don't care what your score is. So we've got this framework for assessment. And what do we mean by digitally independent? What does this score tell us? Well, it tells us 2 things. How capable an individual is in making good decisions and operating in the digital space, and how prepared they are to protect themselves and respond accordingly if something unexpected happens. And we want to figure out how much help they need on the way for each of these areas. So there's the links I promised you. You can download the diagnostic framework. I'm going to go into it a little bit more now. But I thought I'd give this here because I'm going to give some later links to something else. The online assessment, I'm going to come back to too. I'm going to, in the next couple of days, start making some real noise about that because I've got a mission I'm going to share with you now. Now, a weird thing that this ties into. Now, for those of you who are wondering about that fully reliant on someone else space, and any lawyers in the room, this gets murky really quick. Because it turns out that giving somebody the permission to act as you in the digital space is not covered nicely in law. And somebody logging into accounts and managing your bank account or interacting as you on Facebook is really legally fraught. So please be careful here when you start digging into it. And watch this debate. If you are a lawyer and sat in the room and want to have a great conversation about this, this is an area that needs digging into more. So what are the uses for this framework? So before we get into how it looks, well, if you are in the UX or interaction design space, you can look at this in association with your personas and with your demographics and say, okay, how technically, digitally independent are my users and what would support look like? We can customize onboarding and education based on this information. We can customize our communication channels to suit the audience that we're actually talking to, not expecting an older person to go find the obscure piece of our website that has the latest scam warnings on if they're not even familiar you had a website to begin with. We can integrate digital assistance in with life assistance. So if we expect that digital integration and using the internet is part of being a happy, healthy, enriched person later in your life, then we can integrate providing support into our end-life services, such as caring out in the community. The answers we get lead into the recommendations we can give for an individual, and they are domain-specific items or holistic approaches. So domain-specific, such as for shopping, these are recommendations just for this area. But holistic ones are across the board. They will affect multiple. Let's have a look at an example. A holistic example, so password management. A fully independent person, just like yourself, we can say to you, hey, you should use a password manager. It's a pretty good idea. We can say you should use multi-factor authentication, and in fact, one-time passwords are great, and you should probably go for that one. Or here's a physical token, like a YubiKey. But that guidance doesn't work, and the less independent you get, the less likely that is to succeed. So at the lower levels in terms of guidance, we have things like using physical password management solutions such as notepads. And those of you whose gut instinct was to go, notepads are awful and you're a bad person, just quiet. It's not. You need to think about it. Because if you're a person who sits by their computer and logs in only in one place, and that happens in Taoranui, and nobody else knows you're there, and you've got a little notepad with your passwords in, the biggest threat to your life is a family member, and believe me, your family member already knows that your password is your cat's name. So don't worry about the password notebook. If you're fully dependent, this brings a whole set of requirements we haven't covered as an industry. How do we make it safe for somebody to act on someone else's behalf in a banking app? How do we make it auditable? How do we have a shared account without it being a truly shared account, and therefore both users, both the original owner and the carer, looking like the same person? Now, if you're in the banking space, this is an area I'd love for you to start thinking about, because I've seen this in action. We need to be accountable and auditable as carers because it protects us from accusation if it's gone wrong. It's not about insider threat, it's about protecting each other from false accusation. Domain-specific examples, so recovering from the unexpected. A fully independent person will check the news, and they'll check the Twitters, and they'll look on the website, and they'll engage in all the right channels and make a critical analysis of the situation and recover. Wonderful. And if you're down the bottom, you may not even know that a problem has existed unless somebody tells you, let alone be able to recover. You probably favor phone systems or person-to-person contact to feel reassured. And the questions you're going to ask are going to be different to the people who are fully independent. And so we can customize our responses based on this. So what do I want to do with this next? We have a framework. You can go download it. You can go use it today. Well, I want to mass collect data, not in the creepy way. I want us, as a country, to measure the digital independence of ourselves. I'm not sure on lofty aims, so why not try for a whole country? I want us to score a population, and I want to see it because I want to see the breakdown of how independent we really are. How many people need help? What are the scores? What the breakdown? And I'm going to be pushing this out through channels. If you are the type of person who knows how to get that kind of thing into these kind of places so that people in care homes, people who have families, people who are not in this kind of room can see it and engage, please come and talk to me. I want to refine the assessment and make sure that it fits in with assistance plans, working with things like health advocacy groups and digital community groups to try and make sure that we're giving good advice to them. I want to socialize and integrate this into key systems, into design processes. So if you're out there designing an authentication system or a system for an application that's not just used by tech folk, that your application is used because you're a library or you're a community center or because you're a supermarket or a bank and you're the type of place that lots of people come from all sorts of walks of life, then I want to start seeing this in there. I want to see that variation of the advice so it's not just use a password manager or feel bad. And this links with something else. As well as pushing this forward, you'll start seeing that this, it's called SAGE, is linked on something called open security. Now, I mentioned this yesterday at PurpleCon. You can catch the talk if you want to understand more. But this is part of a movement that I'm trying very gently to encourage. And that's, I want us to share and collaborate on our open source security tools, documents, frameworks, scripts, anything that's reusable. Not commercially, it's all non-commercial. I want us to make it easy to find, use, and contribute to diagnostic tools and things that we can use every day, just like Sage. And so what I'm asking you to do is, if you have an open source library, framework, tools, script, template, document, God knows what, and you think it would be useful to one other person in this room, I would like you to consider submitting it. I won't own it, it's still your ugly baby. But what I want to do is list it, and I want to make it easy for other people to find. So as long as it has a code of conduct, and if it doesn't, I can help you get one really easily. Has a contribution guide, and that can be just a couple of lines in a README file, is under an open source license, is maintained, as in you remember where it is, and you've logged into that account once sometime in the last few years, and it was created in New Zealand, and because I've had feedback on this, Australians, you can come talk to me too. I've been told you're good people too. So if you have a project like that, like Sage, that you think could change the way we do security to be more collaborative, to work together, to change something little, even if it's not popping shells, then I'd like you to go to opensecurity.nz. I'd like you to use the type form that is there and submit your details and let me list it for you. And let's see if we can get working together on this stuff. I am hoping that we all realize that as we get older, we won't be the people in this room anymore. We'll eventually be the people that have to be supported. Technology will change. One day, we will look around us, and we are the person who's trying to figure out who we ask so we can stay safe. And so I want us to think about that now so we can prepare and start thinking about how we help in those situations, so by the time we get there, it's just how we do it. We protect everybody. Right. There are 4 minutes and 26 seconds remaining, which I would love to give you back into your day. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope to see you using either Sage or on Open Security. Thank you for your time.